It was supposed to be just another hilarious night on the Carol Burnett Show. The sketches were sharp, the cast was ready, and the audience was already laughing before the cameras even started rolling. Carol Burnett, America's comedy queen, was at the top of her game. But behind her famous smile, something was off that evening in 1977, and it had nothing to do with the script. She had done hundreds of episodes before this one. But this particular show, which aired in the fall of that year, would go on to haunt her for decades. She never expected that a routine sketch, one she had helped write and perform, would turn into something she could never watch again. Not because it was bad, far from it. It was one of the funniest of the season. The audience laughed. The critics loved it, but for Carol, it became the night she tried her best to forget. Before the episode aired, everything seemed fine. Tim Conway was goofing off backstage, cracking up the crew as usual. Harvey Korman was sipping coffee, getting into character. Carol walked past them with her usual grace, but with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't explain. She'd been holding back tears all day, and no one had noticed. That was Carol's gift, making everyone laugh while quietly carrying her pain. What no one in the room knew was that earlier that morning, Carol had received a phone call that would shatter her world. Her beloved sister Chrissy had been found unconscious in her apartment. The details were unclear, but it was bad, very bad. Doctors were unsure if she would make it through the night. Carol had a choice: cancel the show or perform. She chose the latter. "I thought if I could just make people laugh tonight, maybe I could forget what was happening," she later said in an interview. "But I was wrong. I've never forgotten that night." She went on stage like a pro, cracking jokes and singing with perfect pitch. But during one particular sketch, a parody of an old romantic drama, she almost broke down. Her voice trembled and her hands shook just slightly. The camera didn't catch it, but her eyes. If you watch closely, you'll see something was different. The sparkle was missing, and in its place was something deeper, a sorrow she was hiding from the world. After the show wrapped, the crew celebrated what they thought was another hit. But Carol didn't stay. She quietly slipped away, her laughter now long gone. What happened next would change everything. The episode that froze in time. The next day, Carol sat alone in her dressing room. The laughter of the previous night seemed like a distant echo. The stage was quiet now, the costumes put away. All she had was a VHS tape of the episode they'd filmed, an episode she couldn't bring herself to watch. News came in that her sister had passed away during the night, and in that moment, everything she did the night before, every laugh, every joke, suddenly felt hollow. "I made people laugh while my sister was dying," Carol whispered to herself. What kind of sister does that? It wasn't true, of course. Carol did what she thought was right. But guilt has a cruel way of twisting even the kindest actions. She took the tape and locked it away, not out of shame, but because watching it meant reliving that day. It became frozen in time, a haunting reminder of the worst night of her life. Friends tried to comfort her. Vicki Lawrence sent flowers. Tim Conway stopped by with a card that just said, "Love you, kid," but nothing helped. That sketch, the one where she nearly cried on stage, was supposed to be funny, yet now it held a memory so sharp it could cut her open. She told the studio never to rerun that episode, and for years they didn't. Fans noticed. Some even wrote letters asking why one of their favorite episodes had disappeared from syndication. But Carol never answered. It was too personal, too painful. Then, something strange happened. A young fan found a bootleg copy of the episode and uploaded it online years later. It went viral. People laughed, commented, shared. Classic Burnett, they called it. But Carol didn't laugh. She turned off her computer, walked to her study, and cried. The past, no matter how deeply buried, had found its way back. She later admitted she watched a few seconds. "That was all I could take," she said, "just enough to see her face again. And then I stopped." You see, Chrissy had visited the studio that week. Her sister was in the audience, smiling proudly as Carol performed. That was the last time Carol saw her alive, and now that same smile was captured forever in a show Carol couldn't bear to relive. But something kept tugging at her, a feeling she couldn't explain. And one night, decades later, that feeling pulled her back toward the truth she'd been avoiding. It had been over 30 years since that episode aired. Carol had done countless interviews, accepted awards, and written books. She had told stories about her childhood, her career, even the painful parts of her personal life. But the one episode, the one night that still lived in the shadows, remained untouched. Until a letter arrived. It was handwritten, in neat cursive, from a woman in Seattle. She explained that her name was Lisa, and that her mother had once worked at the hospital where Carol's sister had been taken in 1977. "My mother never forgot how kind you were to the nurses," the letter read. "She said you made sure everyone was thanked, even while you were grieving." Carol blinked. She had no memory of that. She didn't remember thanking anyone. She barely remembered how she got through the funeral. Hell, but Lisa's letter didn't stop there. "My mother also told me something else," it said. "She remembered your sister saying, 'Tell Carol not to cancel the show. She was born to make people laugh.'" Carol froze. She read the line again, then again. Could it be true? She later found out Lisa's mother had passed away years earlier, but the story remained. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just a comforting tale. But Carol chose to believe it. For the first time in decades, the guilt started to lift. That night, Carol walked over to the cabinet where the tape was still locked away. She held it in her hands. Her fingers trembled. She didn't press play. Not yet. But she didn't hide it away again either. A few months later, while working on a memoir, Carol finally wrote about the episode. She didn't name it. She didn't describe the sketch, but she told the story of what happened that week. And at the end of the chapter she wrote, "Laughter and loss live side by side. I made people laugh, and I lost someone I loved. Maybe that's what life is, holding both in the same breath." The episode still doesn't air on television. It's never been officially released, but the fans who've seen it still talk about how funny it was, how brilliant Carol was, even in that one odd sketch where she seemed a little quieter than usual. They didn't know they were watching a woman holding back a flood of grief behind her smile, but now they do. And Carol finally found peace in the one place she never expected to. Years later, Carol Burnett was invited to speak at an awards ceremony honoring television legends. She stood before a crowd of young actors, comedians, and writers, many of whom had grown up watching her. The host asked her to share a story that had never been told before. There was a pause, and then, for the first time on stage, she talked about the episode. She didn't name the sketch. She didn't mention the details, but she told the truth. "There was one night I didn't want to perform," she said, her voice steady, "but I did anyway. And it became the hardest show I've ever done, not because of the jokes, but because of what I lost that night." The room was silent. "I spent years hiding from that moment," she continued. "But hiding never made it easier. It just made it lonelier. So if you're ever carrying something heavy and still trying to do your job, know that you're not alone." The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Later that evening, a reporter asked her if she'd ever watched the episode now. Carol smiled and said, "Maybe someday, but I already know how it ends." In the end, the episode wasn't about comedy or ratings or even tragedy. It was about strength, the quiet kind, the kind we don't always see in the spotlight. It was the night Carol Burnett didn't just entertain America. She carried her pain with grace. She honored her sister with laughter. And she showed us all that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when no one else even knows. And maybe that's why, even now, that one episode remains hidden. Because behind every laugh was a love too deep for words. And sometimes that silence says more than a standing ovation ever could.